Hello friends, welcome to my channel, and in this session we are going to discuss about the development of arterial system. In the previous videos we have seen the introduction to the development of heart, how the heart transfers from a single primitive endothelial heart tube to the definitive heart tube, and how it undergoes septations further to form the four chambers with the arterial end and venous end at the cephalic and caudal ends respectively. Then we have seen the development of these septations in the truncus arteriosus, dividing the arterial end of the heart into pulmonary trunk and aorta. And in this session we are going to see the development of major blood vessels under following headings. First we will see what is vasculogenesis and angiogenesis. Then we will see the development of aortic arch arteries. Then we will see development of Vitelline and umbilical arteries. Lastly, we focus on the development of coronary arteries. To begin with, the blood vessel development occurs by the two mechanisms, namely vasculogenesis and angiogenesis. Vasculogenesis is a process where the vessel arises or originate from the coalescence of the existing angioblasts, whereas angiogenesis is a process by where a new vessel sprouts from the existing vessel. So major vessels including the dorsal aorta, cardinal veins, they are formed by the vasculogenesis, whereas the remainder of the vascular system is formed by the sprouting of these existing vessels, that is by the angiogenesis. Both vasculogenesis and angiogenesis happen under the guidance of the vascular endothelial growth factor. So in the previous videos we have seen this picture where the developing heart tube has two ends, one is arterial end, one is venous. You can see the venous end receives the three sets of veins, Vitelline, umbilical and the cardinal veins, and the arterial end has the aortic sac to which aortic arch arteries are connected, and this aortic sac is connected to the pair of dorsal aorta which are in the splanchnopleutic layer of the mesoderm. So you can notice here, this is the arterial end and this is the venous end of the developing heart. And you have already seen the adult arterial system, how it is. When you see the adult arterial system, what you see is, first you will see arch of aorta here. So this is the arch of aorta, and here you can see the brachiocephalic trunk. Then you will see left common carotid artery, left subclavian artery. So this is the brachiocephalic trunk dividing into right subclavian artery and right common carotid artery, whereas the left common carotid artery and left subclavian artery are coming from the arch itself. And this is the descending aorta. Here you will see the ascending aorta, this is the arch of aorta, and this is descending aorta. So this is the pattern of the adult arterial system having the major blood vessels. So here you can see in this picture, you can notice how the adult arterial system is existing. Here we are focusing only on the major blood vessels. So you can see how the right and left recurrent laryngeal nerve is hooking around the different arteries on right and left side. On the right side it is hooking around the right subclavian artery. On the left side hooks around the arch of aorta, that is ligamentum arteriosum. What is that? We will see in the further slides. So the arterial system has its development in conjunction with the development of pharyngeal arches. That's why they are called as aortic arches. So when the pharyngeal arches are developing from 4th to 5th week of development, each arch receives its own cranial nerve and its own artery. These arteries are arising from the aortic sac. What is aortic sac? Aortic sac is the distal portion of the truncus arteriosus outside the pericardium. So truncus arteriosus, which is forming the outflow channel of the heart, which is divisible into pulmonary trunk and aorta by a spiral aorticopulmonary septum, but the distal portion, the most cephalic portion of the truncus arteriosus outside the pericardium, enlarged to form the aortic sac. and this aortic sac is connected to both the dorsal aorta, right and left dorsal aorta, and this communication further enhanced by the arrangement of the aortic arch arteries. So these aortic arch arteries are embedded in the mesenchyme of the pharyngeal arch, and they are terminating in the right and left dorsal aortae. So in the region of the arches, the dorsal aortae remain paired, but caudal to this region they fuse to form a single vessel. So when you see the developing aortic arches, so we have seen the heart has these 4 dilatations: truncus arteriosus, bulbus caudes, primitive ventricle, atrium, and along with the sinus venosus. We have seen that. So here the truncus arteriosus will be here like this, attached to the right and left dorsal aorta. But this aortic sac, what we are seeing, this aortic sac, which is the cephalic portion of the truncus arteriosus outside the pericardium, it is connected to the dorsal aorta, the right and left dorsal aorta. So these both dorsal aorta, they remain paired, and here will be development of these aortic arch arteries. They remain paired here, right and left, but below they form a single descending aorta. Right and left aorta fused to form a single descending aorta. So when you see here, from this aortic sac, so there will be development of these aortic arch arteries. So here you see the aorta is fusing to form a single channel here, but here there is development of these aortic arch arteries like this. So you have first arch artery, second, third, fourth and sixth. First, second, third, fourth and sixth, which are opening into this aortic sac, the distal portion of truncus arteriosus. So fifth arch artery neither develops, or it develops but it will degenerate. So there will be these 6 pairs of aortic arch arteries, and these arch arteries, when you see in the sagittal section here, the developing brain is here, will be here, and here you have the developing heart with the 2 dorsal aortae, right and left dorsal aortae, like this. But here in between them you will see a developing pharyngeal arches here. So primitive pharynx and all, they will develop here. So these arch arteries, when they form, they will get embedded in the mesenchyme of this pharyngeal arches, and they are called as pharyngeal arch arteries. Like this it will look. Okay, so this is the pattern of the aortic arch arteries. So here you are noticing this aortic sac will be here, aortic sac. So it will join with the right and left dorsal aorta. They fuse here to form a single channel. And these aortic arch arteries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 arch arteries, because there are 6 pharyngeal arches, there will be 6 arch arteries. The 5th one develops and disappear later or degenerate earlier. And all these pharyngeal arch arteries, what we are seeing in the diagrammatic representation, they are not present at one time simultaneously. They are appearing and degenerating. When the first and second develop, they degenerate. Then third, fourth develop, then sixth develops, fifth develops and degenerates, like that. So these pharyngeal arches and their vessel appear in a cranial to caudal sequence, but they are not present simultaneously. The aortic sac contributes to a branch to a new arch as it forms and giving rise to total 5 pairs of arteries. So aortic sac gives rise to 5 to 6 pairs of arch arteries which are not developing simultaneously. First what happens? First and second arch artery develop, they disappear, leaving some remnants. Then third and fourth, sixth develops. They undergo modification or alteration to form the adult arterial system. So what happens during the further development? This arterial pattern undergoes modifications. Some vessels regress, some vessel will modify, some vessel will undergo alteration to form the adult arterial system. So before this development of aortic arteries, there is development of this truncus arteriosus into ventral aorta and pulmonary trunk. That is by the aortico-pulmonary septum that we have seen. In the previous video we have seen how this spiral aortico-pulmonary septum divides the truncus arteriosus into two outflow channels. In the proximal portion, what you see, pulmonary artery lies anteriorly, aorta lies posteriorly. In the middle portion, the pulmonary artery lies on the left side, aorta on the right side. In the distal portion, pulmonary artery lies posteriorly, aorta lies anteriorly. This happens because of the spiral septum, and the spiral septation has spiraling in an anti-clockwise direction, and it is because of the flow of the bloodstream through this outflow channel. It is influenced by the cardiac neural crest cells. So here you can see, as a result of development of aorticopulmonary septum, what happens? The upper 5 pairs, 1 to 5, they open into the aorta, whereas the sixth pair, the sixth aortic arch artery is continuous with the pulmonary trunk, establishing the adult arterial system. So first what happens? By the day 27, most of the first aortic arch disappears. First to appear is first and second aortic arch, but by day 27, most of the first aortic arch disappears. Only a small portion of it persists as the maxillary artery in the adults. Similarly, the second aortic arch also develops after the first one, but soon it disappears. But the remaining portions of the secondary aortic arch remain as hyoid and stapedial arteries in the adults. So these aortic arches undergo modification. So first you will see the aortic sac. First what happens? There is development of first aortic arch, and what happens here? Second aortic arch, which are opening into dorsal aortae, right and left dorsal aortae. This is the first aortic arch artery, second aortic arch artery. They undergo degeneration, leaving behind maxillary artery, hyoid artery and stapedial artery. So the first arch artery will be forming maxillary artery, the second aortic arch will form the hyoid artery and the stapedial artery. They will degenerate. So first and second aortic arch arteries are the first to develop and disappear, leaving some remnants in the adult arterial system. You can notice here. So you can notice here the first and second aortic arch arteries are disappearing. Then there is the development of the third, fourth and sixth aortic arch arteries. So third arch is large, fourth and sixth arches are in the process of formation. So as I told you earlier, all these arch arteries are not appearing simultaneously. They are appearing in the craniocaudal sequence and they are appearing chronologically, one after the other, not at a time. So this third arch is large and fourth and sixth arch are in the process of formation. What happens here? From the sixth arch we will see a primitive pulmonary artery which will soon enter in the lung buds developed by this laryngotracheal bud, which is developing from the primitive pharynx. So you can notice here. So this is the third arch artery which is developing here. The third arch artery is developing here. So fourth is here, and sixth is forming the primitive pulmonary artery. So third, fourth, sixth. First to develop are first and second aortic arch arteries, they disappear. Third is large. Fourth and sixth are forming. So like this, what happens? On the 29th day, the first and second aortic arch completely disappear, leaving maxillary artery from the first arch, hyoid and stapedial artery from the second arch. With the further development, what happens? The aortic arch system will lose the symmetrical form. The right and left symmetry is lost, establishing the adult definitive pattern which is heavier on the left side. So this entire aortic system is heavy on the left side. That's why on the mediastinal surface of the left lung we are seeing only arterial impressions, whereas on the mediastinal surface of the right lung we are seeing mainly venous impressions in the majority part. So there will be modification of these aortic arches. How it happens? The third aortic arch forms the common carotid artery and also the first part of the internal carotid artery. The remainder of the internal carotid artery is formed by the cranial portion of the dorsal aorta. The external carotid artery is a sprout of the third aortic arch. So this external carotid artery is happening by angiogenesis. What is angiogenesis? Sprouting of the vessel from the already existing vessel. So these modifications happen there. So the fourth aortic arch persists on both sides, but its ultimate result or fate is different on right and left side. On the left it forms a part of arch of aorta, whereas on the right side it forms the proximal part of the right subclavian artery. Whereas the distal part of this right dorsal aorta, it is formed by the right dorsal aorta and seventh intersegmental artery. What is that we will see. So this is the modification of the aortic arches. So you have seen first there is a development of what here? First and second aortic arch arteries, they soon disappear, leaving behind the third. The third is large and it forms the part of common carotid artery and the first part of internal carotid artery. It is forming the common carotid artery, whereas the external carotid artery is coming as a sprouting, whereas the remaining portion of the internal carotid artery is formed by the cranial part of dorsal aorta, whereas the fourth aortic arch artery on the right side forming the right subclavian artery, left side is forming the part of arch of aorta. On the right side, the distal portion of the right subclavian artery is formed by the seventh intersegmental artery. What is that? We will see now. So you have seen how this arterial arch system develops. It develops from what? Aortic sac. What is aortic sac? The cephalic or the distal portion of the truncus arteriosus outside the pericardium. How it is communicated? It communicates with what? Both the right and left dorsal aorta, which are paired outside, but they form a single descending aorta below the developing heart. And how this aortic arch, first what happens there? There is development of first aortic arch artery and second aortic arch arteries. First and second. But soon they will disappear. Leaving behind the maxillary artery. Then there is development of the third aortic arch, which is now like this. So this portion is divided now. The third aortic arch. Are you following? The third aortic arch is formed. Let us simplify this with one more diagram. So, this is the aortic sac, first aortic arch, second aortic arch, second aortic arch. They disappear, and when you see the aortic arch system as a whole here, okay, so first aortic arch artery, second aortic arch artery, third, fourth, so first, second, third, fourth, then you have the sixth aortic arch artery. So on the right side here, first, second, third, fourth, sixth. This is the aortic sac. So what happens here? The first and second disappear. They are connected here. These all are connected to this dorsal aorta, right and left dorsal aorta, like this. Right and left dorsal aorta. First and second, they disappear. First and second disappear, leaving behind the third one. So when you see the arterial pattern here, so like this we are seeing. Like this, first, second, third, fourth and sixth. So this first and second, they disappear. So what happens here? There is development of the third. How this third is forming? This third is forming the common carotid artery and internal carotid artery. Whereas the external carotid artery is coming as a sprout from here. It's coming as a sprout from the third aortic arch. And during this, what happens? During all of this, what happens? There is also development of these segmental arteries. 1, 2, 3, 4, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Say 7. Segmental arteries. There are many segmental arteries coming from these dorsal aorta, and from these segmental arteries, these all segmental arteries are connected by a elongated artery. So amongst this, important is the seventh segmental artery. Seventh segmental artery is important. The seventh cervical intersegmental artery. Like this, you have segmental arteries coming from the dorsal aorta, and they form a common channel that is called as elongated channel here. So from here you have the external carotid artery and this internal carotid artery. Internal carotid artery is coming from third arch. Okay, so like this they undergo development. So what happens here? The fifth aortic arch, that is never formed, or even if it is formed incompletely and it is undergoing regression. But what happens to the sixth aortic arch? The sixth aortic arch, also known as the pulmonary arch, it gives off some important branch, the developing lung bud. So it forms the proximal portion and distal portion. The proximal portion forms the pulmonary artery, whereas the distal portion disappears on the right side, whereas it forms the ductus arteriosus on the left side. So you can summarize the derivatives of the aortic arches. The first aortic arch forms and disappears, leaving only maxillary arteries. Second artery also appears and disappears, leaving the hyoid and stapedial arteries as a remnant. third aortic arch, which is large. It forms common carotid artery, first part of internal carotid artery, and external carotid artery appear as a sprout from this third aortic arch artery. Whereas the fourth aortic arch artery on the left side forms the arch of aorta, giving rise to the left common carotid and left subclavian arteries. Whereas on the right side, it forms the proximal portion of the right subclavian artery. So, the sixth aortic arch artery on the right side only forms right pulmonary artery. The distal portion disappears. Whereas on the left side, it forms pulmonary artery and distal portion forms the ductus arteriosus. The distal portion forms ductus arteriosus. Whereas on the right side, it disappears. Remember, D for distal, D for disappear. On the left side, D for distal, it forms ductus arteriosus. So, now there is some alteration in this aortic arch system to establish definitive arterial system. So, what happens here? The dorsal aorta between the third and fourth, which is called as ductus caroticus, is obliterated, and right dorsal aorta disappears between the origin of seventh intersegmental artery. I told you there will be development of segmental arteries from the right and left dorsal aorta. Which one is important there? Seventh intersegmental artery is important, and all these segmental arteries join to form a elongated channel, which will form the future vertebral artery. It will form the future vertebral artery, and with the cephalic folding and growth of the forebrain and elongation of the neck, push the heart into thoracic cavity, so that the carotid artery and brachiocephalic arteries elongate in considerable fashion. So, like this, you will see the alteration of the aortic arches. Let us see. So, initially, how many arches will be there? There is a first arch, second arch, third arch, fourth arch, and sixth arch. What happens? First and second disappear. Then remains third. Third and fourth are joined by ductus caroticus. This ductus caroticus disappears. So, third arch forms the what here? Third aortic arch forms common carotid artery and also internal carotid artery. This cranial portion of the internal carotid artery is formed by both the dorsal aorta, whereas the external carotid artery appears as a sprout from which arch? From the third arch. Whereas the fourth arch on the left side forms what? Arch of aorta. On the right side forms proximal portion of right subclavian artery. But there is a development of what here? There is development of these intersegmental arteries. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Like this, they are forming many intersegmental arteries there. Important one is seventh one. And all these intersegmental first to 7, they are connected by a elongated channel. This elongated channel on either side. This elongated channel will grow and form the future vertebral artery. And these both elongated channel go and fuse in the base of the brain to form the basilar artery. Whereas these two internal carotid artery also enter the developing brain in the base of the brain, and they also communicate with this vertebral artery and basilar artery to form the circle of Willis. So, this 1 to 7 intersegmental artery which are connected by elongated channel, it forms vertebral artery which fuse in the base of the brain to form the basilar artery. So, you can see now coming to the fate of the sixth aortic arch. You can see the fourth aortic arch on the left side forms what here? Arch of aorta. On the right side forms the proximal portion of right subclavian artery. Distal portion is formed by which artery? This seventh cervical intersegmental artery. On the left side, this seventh intersegmental artery forms left subclavian artery. Whereas the portion of dorsal aorta between this seventh intersegmental artery and this fusion of both the right and left dorsal aorta, it disappears here. it disappears. Only it remains on the left side to form the descending aorta. So these all alterations are happening in the what? In the primitive aortic arch system. So first you will see disappearance of first and second. Third is forming common carotid, internal carotid. The external carotid is coming as a sprout, and the portion between third and fourth is called as carotid duct. It disappears. Communication between them, it disappears. The fourth aortic arch on the left side forming arch of aorta, on the right side forming proximal portion of right subclavian artery. But during this, what happens? There is already development of these intersegmental arteries. Which one is important among them? Seventh one. So seventh on the right side forms the distal part of right subclavian artery, whereas on the left side forms left subclavian arteries. These intersegmental arteries are connected by a elongated channel, 1 to 7 intersegmental arteries. This elongated channel will elongate and meet in the base of the brain to form the basilar artery, and this internal carotid artery joins it to form the circle of Willis. Whereas amongst these, the sixth aortic arch has connection like this. The proximal portion forms the pulmonary artery. On the right side, the distal portion disappears, whereas on the left side, the distal portion remains as ductus arteriosus. After the birth, it disappears and forms ligamentum arteriosum. That's why the right recurrent laryngeal nerve is hooking around the subclavian artery, because the distal portion of the sixth aortic arch is disappearing here. Whereas on the left side, it hooks around ligamentum arteriosum, which is nothing but ductus arteriosus, coming from the distal portion of the sixth aortic arch artery. So that's why there is discrepancy in the course of right and left recurrent laryngeal nerve that we will see. So what happens here? Further alteration, the heart will shift to the thoracic cavity, elongating brachiocephalic trunk and common carotid arteries. Whereas on the right side, the distal part of the sixth aortic arch and fifth aortic arch disappear. So recurrent laryngeal nerve moves up and hooks around right subclavian artery. On the left, the nerve does not move up, since it is hooking around the ductus arteriosus, which is later forming ligamentum arteriosum. So with this one, let us summarize the aortic arches. So when you see, this is the aortic sac, the distal portion of the truncus arteriosus. These are two dorsal aortas which are communicating with the aortic sac, which are forming a single vessel by fusion below the developing heart. There is development of first and second, they disappear, then third, fourth and sixth. In a craniocaudal sequence, the fifth aortic arch artery forms but later disappears. So first to form are first and second aortic arch arteries. They disappear, leaving maxillary artery and stapedial and hyoid arteries respectively. The third aortic arch artery is large, which is forming the common carotid artery and also internal carotid artery. And the external carotid artery is coming as a sprout from the third aortic arch artery. And the connection between the third and fourth, the ductus caroticus, disappears. The distal portion of the internal carotid artery is formed by the cranial ends of the dorsal aorta. Whereas the fourth aortic arch on the right side forms the proximal portion of the subclavian artery. The distal portion is formed by the seventh intersegmental artery, which is important. And the junction between the seventh intersegmental and the fusion disappears on the right dorsal aorta. Whereas on the left side, the fourth aortic arch forms the arch of aorta, and the left seventh intersegmental artery forms the left subclavian artery. And the portion between the fourth and sixth arch forms the brachiocephalic trunk on the right side, whereas Now coming to the sixth arch. The proximal portion forms the pulmonary arteries, whereas the distal portion disappears on the right side, but on the left side it remains as ductus arteriosus, which later forms ligamentum arteriosum. So with the division of the truncus arteriosus into pulmonary trunk and aorta, the upper four to five arch arteries open into aorta, the sixth opens into pulmonary trunk. That's why pulmonary trunk opens into pulmonary arteries via sixth aortic arch, whereas remaining all the arches they receive blood via aorta. So like this, there is development of the adult arterial system from the primitive aortic arch arteries. So coming to the development of the Vitelline arteries, they are initially number of paired vessels supplying the yolk sac. That's why they are called as Vitelline arteries. They fuse to form the arteries in the dorsal mesentery of the gut. In adult, they are forming the celiac and superior mesenteric arteries, whereas inferior mesenteric arteries are derived from the umbilical arteries. The umbilical arteries, these are the paired ventral branches of the dorsal aorta, close to placenta, and they are attached to the placenta and they are in close relation with the allantois. During fourth week, they acquire a secondary connection with the one more dorsal branch of aorta, that is forming the common iliac artery, and lose their earlier origin. So after birth, the proximal portions of the umbilical arteries are persisting as the internal iliac, which is a branch of common iliac and supravesical arteries. The distal parts are obliterated to form the median umbilical ligaments. The coronary arteries. The coronary arteries are derived from the epicardium. We have already seen in the previous video, the epicardium itself is derived from a proepicardial organ, which is derived from the caudal portion of the dorsal mesocardium, which itself is derived from secondary heart field. So connection of these coronary arteries to the aorta occurs by the ingrowth of the arterial endothelial cells. They invade the aorta. That's why establishing their origin from the ascending aorta. So with this much knowledge on the development of the aortic arch arteries, Vitelline arteries and umbilical artery, coronary arteries, let us see the anomalies of the vascular development. So patent ductus arteriosus. The ductus arteriosus, which communicates the pulmonary artery to the aorta, it disappears after the birth under the action of the prostaglandins, but it remains in some people with the patent lumen. Then it is called as patent ductus arteriosus. And sometimes there will be a coarctation of aorta, narrowing of the aorta. So the patent ductus arteriosus with the post or preductal coarctation of aorta is very common. So narrowing of the aorta and abnormal origin of the right subclavian artery. Usually the distal portion, this portion will disappear. This portion will form the proximal portion of the right subclavian artery. But there is a disappearance of the proximal portion of the right subclavian artery. So here in this case, the right subclavian artery is coming from the fusion of both right and left dorsal aorta. So then it has a invariably long and curvy course behind the esophagus, compressing the esophagus sometimes. Double aortic arch. The portion of the right dorsal aorta distal to this seventh intersegmental artery fail to disappear. It remains intact, forming the double aortic arch. So you can see, so during development the truncus arteriosus is connected to right and left dorsal aortas, but with the further modification and alteration in the aortic arch arteries, the right aortic segment should disappear. But what happens here? This is how the normal development takes place because of the left-sidedness under the action of the PI2X2 gene, which you have seen in the previous videos. But here they fail to disappear, forming the double aortic arch, or sometimes the left side disappears, leaving the right side. That is called as right aortic arch. So this is the double aortic arch. It may compress the trachea and esophagus, leading to dyspnea and dysphagia like symptoms in the newborns. Sometimes the right remains intact, the left side disappears. That is called as right aortic arch. Usually it is with the patent ductus arteriosus, and they surround the superior mediastinal structures. Then one more anomaly is interrupted aortic arch. In this one, you can see there will be abnormal obliteration of the proximal portions of the fourth aortic arch artery. It can happen anywhere between the brachiocephalic trunk and common caudate artery and left subclavian artery, or left subclavian artery and seventh intersegmental artery, interrupted aortic arch. So that is about the aortic arch system. Hope you understood. If you have any feedbacks and genuine suggestions, you are always welcome. Thank you.